Hey internet friends, I wanted to post a spooky video, a spooky Halloween video, about one of the scariest conspiracies that I've been witness to recently in our media and by our politicians. And that conspiracy is the idea that corporatism and capitalism are the same thing. I find it very interesting that so many people have believed that capitalism has failed, that capitalism somehow is an ultimate failure and not a path to any kind of organized society or economy. They talk frequently about, the slave-made goods in China. They talk about Starbucks, how there's a Starbucks on every corner, and yet they keep using the word capitalism as if either of those have anything to do with capitalism. Look, capitalism is just people exchanging goods and services. That's all capitalism is. People exchanging goods and services. It's gone on for centuries. And it's gone on very well for centuries and centuries and centuries, especially in small communities without outside influence and free trade. I like the idea of free trade, too. As if, when you trade your goods and services across the planet to another culture that, has completely different values as your culture has, that trade isn't also going to change your values. That's ridiculous. There's no such thing as free trade. If you start trading with Chinese corporations that hire Chinese slaves and, put lead paint on children's toys and in toothpaste and stuff, that's not free. You're importing societal decisions and a societal lack of human value along with these cheap goods and services. And also you're importing more poverty in this country, because the more things you import from the Chinese slaves, the less people in this country have jobs. So explain to me how any of that's free. You're costing the lower class and the middle class all of their wealth, and you're costing the upper middle class and upper classes their health. And you're doing that by subsidizing another culture that's absolutely toxic. I mean, there's so many people in China that it should be no surprise to anybody that they're horribly abused by the corporations that run the slave factories there. When you've got 1 billion people in your country, the human life itself has less value. It's a simple scarcity thing. When there's 999,999 people right behind you, ready to take your job, you're not going to go on strike. You're not going to have any rights at all. So conflating corporatism with capitalism, I find it very disturbing. A small family-owned business that builds goods or does services in a small community has nothing to do with Starbucks. They're antithetical altogether. And the argument that, inevitably the more successful small family businesses will somehow instantly become... Ooh, there was a spider right there. It's my spooky Halloween video and a real spider showed up. Will become, some kind of a giant mega corporation just naturally or organically or something. It's completely asinine. A small family business and Starbucks are like the opposite of each other. So to try to claim that, capitalism has failed because of Starbucks and because of, the increasingly shrinking middle class and increasingly starving lower class and all the Chinese slave-made goods that we have imported in this country that's completely ruining our economy and our way of life here, to try and claim that that's somehow a failure of capitalism is insane. It's corporatism. It's corporate control. It's all corporate corruption. These corporations wouldn't even be able to compete with small family-owned businesses if they didn't buy politicians outright and rig the rules in such a way that benefits them ahead of local family businesses. I mean, do you really think Starbucks could be competitive with a scrappy family-owned local business if they weren't, somehow, subsidizing government collusion? I sincerely doubt it. I supremely doubt it. They're able to bully their way into lower costs and lower quality goods that they're able to sell to the masses because they've paid for the politicians to allow them to do so. This is corruption. This is corporatism and corruption. It has nothing to do with capitalism. So when I hear, the Bernie Sanders fan club and Antifa and all these kind of, left-wing, gun control advocate, idiots claiming that, capitalism has failed us and that capitalism is the most evil system in human history, none of them had an aunt or an uncle or a parent or, who ran a small business. None of them ran their own little lemonade stand at some point. Are you insane? Are you really conflating your kid's lemonade stand with Walmart? There's a big difference between Walmart and a small family-owned business. So I think that it's very important that our society stop abusing the term capitalism. Because what we have in this country isn't capitalism. It's rampant corruption and corporatism. And it's the opposite of capitalism. Capitalism is a free market. People able to trade, to sell and buy and trade goods and services in a way that engenders competition and lowers the prices for everybody competitively, locally in the system. That's capitalism. What we have now is corporatism. You can't start a store that's going to compete with Walmart. No way. There's 5 Walmarts in a 20-mile radius from me here where I'm at right now in San Diego County. And you're going to tell me that somehow you're going to start a store that's going to compete with Walmart, And then further, you have these corporate apologists who are going to claim that, trying to put the brakes on something like Walmart or cheap Chinese slave-made goods is, somehow, anti-freedom, anti-libertarian. And it's like, well, no, it's not, There's nothing libertarian about the Chinese slave factories that are sending toxic garbage to us in this country, and the fact that we no longer can employ a lower or middle class here, given that trade agreement. There's nothing libertarian about that. That's fascism. That's straight up fascism. The Chinese government is fascist. The whole system in China is fascism. That's why the factories there are so dismal that they have to have suicide nets on them to keep the factory workers from committing suicide. People live in dog cages there. People live in these little kennel structures stacked on top of each other and work, 60-hour weeks, 70, 80-hour weeks for a bowl of rice, And we're importing those goods here and claiming oh yeah, well, that's just the price of capitalism. Capitalism's messed up, isn't it? That's not capitalism. That's nothing to do with capitalism. That's fascism. So stop conflating our corporate fascist corruption that we're currently in with Starbucks and Walmart and all these other crappy corporations. McDonald's, Burger King, all of them. If it's a corporate chain and there's more than 5 or 6 of them, it's part of the problem and they should be broken up. And that's not, that doesn't make me a communist to suggest that there shouldn't be 18,000 Starbucks in the country or 25,000 Walmarts in the country. That doesn't make me a fascist or a communist or some kind of psychopath. That's just basic reasoning and logic. Think about it. If one store is able to own that many branches all over the country, what do you think they're going to do to the competition? What do you think they're going to do to the prices? What do you think they're going to do to the economy? And then to claim that kind of corrupt corporate fascism has any kind of connection whatsoever with capitalism, which is, a free market where, people are free to start a business and compete, that's not where we're living now. We live in a corporate fascist nightmare. We live in this absolute Starbucks and Walmart dystopia. That's where we live now. In the 1960s, most of these little towns had an awesome little downtown, and most of the little businesses there were all locally family-owned small businesses competing, to sell goods and services in some kind of logical, reasonable way. And look at the standard of living back in the 50s and 60s. It was higher than it is now. People are going to claim, there's, what about the civil rights movement? What about the internet? Other things that we've developed since then? And look me trying to point out that when there were a lot of small family-owned businesses, that was a better system than us going to Walmart and Starbucks for everything, doesn't make me some kind of racist who's not in favor of, some of the other social movements that happened along the way. I see no connection between those two. I think, honestly, the civil rights movement was probably inevitable. I mean, I think that was going to happen no matter what. It was just a matter of time and a matter of having the right leaders in place to make it happen. But to pretend that our economic structure, which has rapidly and vastly declined since before then, honestly, there's the institution of the Federal Reserve, the IRS, all these unconstitutional things that, our dollar going off of the silver certificate and gold standard. I mean, there's been so many corrupt corporate fascist moves that have destroyed our way of life here in the last 50 or 60 years. And to conflate that with the word capitalism, or to claim that, by being upset about that makes you a racist because you are somehow disrespecting the civil rights movement as if there's any connection whatsoever, which there isn't, is insane. And it needs to stop. This is the spookiest thing tearing this country apart, is that we are importing slave-made toxic goods by the container ship, by the hundreds of container ships per day, probably on a national scale. For what? So we can get slightly lower prices while everybody's unemployed and sliding deeper into debt? It's obviously insane. And this is corporatism. This is globalist, New World Order, corporate fascism. And it has nothing to do with capitalism. So stop talking about capitalism. Stop talking about, the 1%. Let's talk about, the real 1%, the people at the UN and in our own, unconstitutional and illegal federal government, which is, more and more acting like its own private company run by the Rothschilds and Rockefellers and, the names you've heard before. They're real people who actually exist. I mean, her name's Hillary Rodham Clinton, Rodham is one of those names, like Rockefeller or Rothschild. These are the people who actually own everything and who actually are killing all of us and who are actually promoting these insanely inexpensive and toxic goods coming from the most miserable cast of people who have ever lived in the history of this planet. I mean, the slavery epidemic in China that we are paying for, we the American people, by shopping at Walmart and Starbucks, are literally paying these corporations to extort and torture one of the largest classes of slaves that this planet has ever seen in China and other third world countries. Sri Lanka, it's going on a bunch of places. It's not just China. It's not capitalism. Capitalism is me saying, hey, I got 3 guns. I only need 2. I'm going to sell you one. And how's that going to work out in this corporate nanny state? I mean, half the guns you could even own are illegal to even own. So this is not a free market. This is a corporate fascist nightmare, as we live in a dystopia, a Walmart and Starbucks dystopia. And if you're not scared by that, if you don't understand the difference between corporatism and capitalism, I'm sorry, but your education system has failed you, your media has failed you, and your own mind has failed you. Probably because you're on some kind of fluoride-based pharmaceutical, and, and you, gosh darn it, you just really like Nickelback. It's just, woo, that's where we live. So, happy Halloween, Internet family. It doesn't get any spookier than that. No.